Welcome to Caregiver SOS On Air, presented by the WellMed Charitable Foundation, with nationally known gerontologist Carol Zernail and award-winning veteran broadcaster Ron Aaron. This program provides health, wellness, and other information for caregivers who are vital to the health and well-being of so many people across our country. And now, here are your hosts, Ron Aaron and Carol Zernail.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the award-winning Caregiver SOS On Air. I'm Ron Aaron, along with our co-host, Carol Zernail. Carol holds a master's degree in social gerontology. She has 30 years' experience in the field. Carol is the co-chair of the Raise Family Caregiving Advisory Council and executive director of the WellMed Charitable Foundation. And we're going to be talking in just a couple of moments with Kyle Woody. And one of the focuses for today's conversation, Carol, is men who are caregivers. We don't talk about it a lot.
I know. I'm so excited. This is a long overdue conversation. You know, when I started out back in the day, really so few men were recognized. And now, you know, it's about 60-40. So about 40% of caregivers are men, which is up considerably, but still not identified and recognized as much as we should. And so anxious to hear what Kyle has to say.
Well, let me introduce Kyle Woody. He is working on the invisible of all non-professional caregivers, men. He gives them the strength to ask for help, the strength to show up with heart, and the strength to care as much for themselves as they do for others. He has over a decade of dedicated service, and he's been steadfast in his mission to reshape how men engage with their caregiving responsibilities, ensuring they are equipped to handle the emotional and logistical demands. Kyle projects there'll be some 1 million men who are caregivers by 2035. And Kyle Woody, thanks for joining us on Caregiver SOS On Air.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you both for having me, and I'm so excited to talk about caregiving and men. That is literally what I geek out about 24/7 every single day. So
why is it important? Why what is it we don't know? What are we missing? Yeah, you use the word invisible.
Yeah, so I think those that are in the caregiving space, I think of, that and if this is referred to a lot, like it's a closet, right, that we're in. We're invisible, we're unseen as caregivers in of all types, but especially non-paid, non-professional family caregivers. But men are like, they're in the jewelry box in the back corner of the closet. And that's a problem, because if you are doing something every single day that no one sees, that you yourself don't see, how can you feel good about it? How can you feel confident? How can you feel like you are equipped or doing the right thing in any particular moment? And so that's what we've set out to do, is create that clarity and give folks that confidence.
So what attracted you to men as caregiving? Do you have experience in caregiving?
I do. I came to the work like I think nearly every person I've met who supports caregivers like I do, from experience. And in my own case, I was 33. My wife was 34, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Our children were 4 and 1. And about 5 years into that, she asked me for a divorce. And that wasn't on my bingo card. Yeah, I wasn't. And I had just really kind of figured out that I was a caregiver, and I was hell-bent on being the best caregiver I could be. I and some friends started an organization to help men like us. We call it Jax. But then that identity was taken from me when she asked for the divorce. So that was another identity crisis in my life. And it just caused me to lean even harder into the work that I do because my wife didn't want me to care for her, but I could go care for men like me. I could go find them and support them. And it, it wasn't just me. Our coalition is a whole group of people. But that's what drew me to it, I think ultimately was a sense of failure in my own caregiving journey and also a desperation for community to find people like me. And I was telling myself the story that, almost like a savior, I can go save everyone else. Um, but what I know now, looking back on it, is that I was just excruciatingly lonely. I was surrounded by people constantly, but I had lost touch with myself and who I was. And so I was trying to find people who were showing up in the world like I was, who faced similar challenges like I did. And that turned into our coalition. That was never my intention. I never set out to do anything like that. It just was the outcome of me trying to ultimately meet my own needs.
All right, Kyle, hold that thought. I'm going to come right back to you, but I want to let folks know who may have just joined us. You're listening to the award-winning Caregiver SOS on air. Our podcast available wherever you listen to your podcast. We're also on the radio in several cities in Texas and Florida, and we're talking with Kyle Woody, his own story of caregiving and then transitioning to try to help other men who were caregivers. So looking back, and I know it's probably painful, your wife diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. You're caring for her, and then she asks for a divorce. Was that out of the blue?
You know, at that time it was for sure, but we had had some marital challenges before her diagnosis. I chalked that up to everybody I know that's married is it's not a cakewalk, marriage is hard. And so I do really think for me, it was out of the blue though, because I was just so focused on her and her, caring for her. And, I also don't have any ill will towards her. She's no longer with us. We lost her in 2020. I was able to stay a part of her caregiving team. And to this day, I'm raising our sons with actually her boyfriend at the time when she passed away, who's become a dear friend of mine and very much a part of the team raising her boys, my boys, our boys. And, people ask me, well, why? Like here, how many people who are what I would characterize as actively dying. Sarah wouldn't have agreed with that. She would say my disease was stable. I wanted to move forward with my life. But how many people do that? Probably not many, right? Um, and I think she just saw she only had so many calories left to give to this world. And she made the decision that the things she wanted to invest those calories in didn't include me. She became very much a advocate for young mothers facing colon cancer. That was her story. And so we became actually more partners in our work, supporting people and friends. So it was I think what needed to happen, and it was what was supposed to happen. And um, our relationship changed. It didn't end.
Well, since you talk about your passion for this work, What do you think we miss about, besides not recognizing men, is there a difference in the way men approach caregiving, do you think, versus how women typically approach it?
Yeah, I really try to be careful about stereotyping people. I like to say if you've met one caregiver, you've met one caregiver. They're absolutely unique. But I think it's also true that men were taught, or at least I was, that strength is silence, suppression, stoicism, just grind through the work. And and that becomes a real problem. I think for me, that was what was preventing me from being fully available in my caregiving emotionally, for all of the beautiful parts of it, the beautiful moments, um, the little things, you know, I had this fortress around me so I wouldn't break down, I wouldn't just melt under the emotional strain. But that also prevented me from feeling the joy, from being just present in these situations that were really hard. Um, and so I do think men tend to not identify as caregivers. A lot of the men who come to us, when we ask them to consider that identity, it's like, well, I'm in sickness and in health. I made a commitment. That's what this is. It's not caregiver. I'm not a caregiver. I'm just a husband taking care of his wife. And we just challenge these men to think more about that and really consider that it is a role. We don't say you have to think of yourself as a caregiver. We just ask them to consider that, because once you do and you understand the gravity and how difficult or really impossible the role is, you can have a little more grace for yourself, have a little more willingness to ask for help, accept it, and then above, like, just taking care of yourself. If I could strip all the things we do down to one thing that I know we've been effective with a male caregiver especially, is that he believes he is worthy of his own compassion.
Very
I
nice.
see so many men they are not.
Right, Kyle Moody, hold that thought. We're going to come right back to you. I'm Ron Aaron. Carol Zernail, our co-host, is here. We're talking with Kyle Moody about men and his organization, Jack's Caregiver Coalition. You're listening to the award-winning Caregiver SOS on air.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Caregiver SOS on air. We're delighted to have you with us. We come to you every week with a discussion of an issue, a problem, some accomplishments involved in caregiving, with more than 60 million caregivers across this country, but most thinking they are the Lone Rangers. We try to bring you the latest information and help that can make that job easier and more manageable. Caregiver SOS on air takes a look at trends across this country. We provide tips on how to be a better caregiver, and most importantly, where you can go for help. On Caregiver SOS on air, we try to give you what you need to make that caregiving manageable and to provide you with the help that can make your life easier. I'm Ron Aaron. Carol Zernail and I are delighted to co-host this program, and we're thrilled you've joined us on the award-winning Caregiver SOS on Air podcast, available everywhere, brought to you by WellMed Charitable Foundation.
Hello, friend. Hello, friend. Really good to see you once again. Hello, friend. Hello, friend. Really good to see you once again.
Well, thank you so much for sticking with us right here on the award-winning Caregiver SOS on air. I'm Ron Aaron, along with Carol Zernail. We're talking with Kyle Woody, who founded an organization called Jack's Caregiver Coalition, and it's something that is really dedicated to helping the men, hundreds of thousands of men who are caregivers. And Carol, you had a question.
Well, the last comment and just the story, Kyle, that you were talking about, where I think what's really important that you said is how many of us, male and female, get so caught up in the tasks of caregiving that we forget, A, that we also have a life, and that B, we build up those walls. And a lot of times it feels like if we let any emotions through, how could we possibly put the dam back up? How could we possibly experience all of that? And so, it's easy to become emotionally distant or just not recognizing what we're going through in a difficult situation. And probably, I think, as you pointed out, even more difficult for men who may not be as, access emotions all the time anyway. I mean, just because the way that we're socialized.
That's right. For a lot of men, the spousal caregivers especially, their spouse is the single source of emotional intimacy in their life. Everywhere else they go, and I'm stereotyping, it's about sports and it's about weather but when it comes to how am I feeling, how am I, really, how am I, like, uh, the spouse, the wife, the partner, that's where he feels safe to do that. And so in a spousal caregiving situation, when that's taken away, she doesn't have the capacity to emotionally labor with him. It's devastating for men. And so that's part of what we help them bridge that gap and find their way back to an emotion, becoming emotionally available to somebody, be it a therapist, be it one of the people with our team, or encouraging them to consider how could they open up to even their own friends, because that's what we hear too, is they don't know how they're doing. When we ask them, how are you? It's all about the person they're caring for. When we press, and over time through relationships, they get clarity on that. They're able to explain it to people, but that takes time to wrestle with, really. All the hard things, all the grief, these things that are heavy, and but we need to feel them. We can't just wish them away. They Suppression doesn't work. I've tried that. It doesn't work. And
Doesn't work. Well,
so
well,
we really encourage that.
talk a little bit about Jack's Caregiver Coalition. Is that in person? Is it online? What does the organization do?
Yeah, great question. We are essentially a community, and we are based in the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, but we are available virtually to anyone in the United States or Canada, specifically men who are caregivers, non-professional, unpaid caregivers. So the way that might look if you're not here in our local area is a virtual coach. So we could talk on Zoom. Uh, we meet them where they're at. If you want to text, that's what we'll text. If you want to phone call like they used to do back in the 1980s, they
I
would just
remember
call.
phone calls.
I do too.
We we will do that if it, and then if you're the in the local area, which we hope to expand to other local areas, we have in-person clatches, which is what we call our discussion groups, that are just beautiful, beautiful spaces where both men and women, all caregivers are welcome to come to that. But I'm really proud to say that 80% of our participants are men. I challenge you to show me groups, caregiver groups anywhere where 80% of the participants are men. I hope somewhere else that exists, because I'd like to go learn from them, but I suspect that's the only, and so we do it in a restaurant, in a private room. We don't bring these people back to clinical spaces. We don't give them stale donuts and Folgers coffee in a styrofoam cup. It's high quality food and drink, and it's free because of the donors who support our work.
How do men
Uh,
find you?
Mostly through social workers uh, here locally. They have our brochures, and so they have been our best allies. They've seen these men forever and had nothing really to offer them that they knew would be effective. And so that's the majority of how folks find us. Other ways are, social media. We were I was blessed to make an appearance on Oprah's podcast in November. So people have found us through that. Um, and hopefully through this.
As well. Well, do you know, at one point in my own career, I was working with people living with Alzheimer's and put together a men's group, just men, and found that there was it was a different dynamic. It was a different dynamic, and there was just a kind of a camaraderie that seemed very welcome. And those were the persons living with dementia. And so I'm imagining that a space created for men, that's a safe space that you do, find people really opening up for the first time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think you had asked earlier what maybe don't people know about men that are in this situation. I think if people could see what happens in these groups for example, uh, uh, so we serve through the law. So if the person loses their person, we have a separate group we send them to, we call sequel makers. They're making the sequel to their life. And at one of those groups, this gentleman had just lost his wife 2 weeks before that meeting, before that gathering. And the gentleman who was facilitating opened the group with this statement. He said, "We're all here for the same reason, and that's because we fell in love." And I was sitting there and I could see this new guy he knew no one in the group, and he instantly knew he was in the right place. And I saw him, and the way that manifested was tears. He just burst into tears, but he felt safe to do that, right? And it's one of my proudest moments is to see new folks come into the community and realize this is where, yeah, and usually we'll hear the just regret for not engaging sooner. And of course, there have been people who've come through the program that it didn't feel like that, or it wasn't as meaningful. But overwhelmingly, it's like, man, I've been so alone for so long, and suddenly I'm not alone anymore. Like I'm with people who get this, and it's a beautiful thing. And men become emotionally available. And suddenly there are moments of tears, there are moments of laughter that people are laughing so hard they can't breathe. And, it's kind of just the absurdity of these situations sometimes, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. Men are emotional
But they
like
don't
that.
show it often.
Yeah, because we're humans, right? Like it doesn't it it's not about our DNA, I don't think at
I
all.
ask you
It's just
because we're,
about
we're
our
almost out of
upbringing.
time. If folks want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
So I recommend going to the Google machine and typing in Jack's Caregiver Coalition because we're the only one, or ChatGPT or whatever your thing is. Our our URL is jackscaregiverco.org. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, all of the main
Cool.
social medias.
Well, Kyle Woody, thank you so much. Fascinating time, and we appreciate it. I'm Ron Aaron, along with Carol Zernail. Kyle Woody is sharing with us men who are caregivers. Thanks for joining us on Caregiver SOS On Air.
The executive producer for Caregiver SOS On Air is Daniel Calderon. The producer is Sharice Pendleton. And the associate producer is Catherine Oglesby. We'll see you next week on Caregiver SOS On Air.
You've been listening to Caregiver SOS On Air, an exclusive presentation of the WellMed Charitable Foundation. We welcome emails with suggestions and comments on this program at radio@wellmed.net. Join co-hosts Carol Zernail and Ron Aaron next week for more on caregiving, improving the health and well-being of caregivers and their care recipients everywhere. For more on caregiving and podcasts of our programs, visit caregiversos.org.